I want to talk a little bit about setting up for working with a wet medium, especially a medium that dries quickly like acrylic. Make sure you have your surface protected. You can consider putting down some waterproof paper or just a sheet of uh, drawing paper or newsprint to keep from staining the table surface that you're working on. Acrylic dries quickly and it's difficult to get off the surface. If you can get the polymer off, you might find that the color, the pigment inside of it is still available and stained. There's a couple of ways of thinking about working. And one of the easiest ways that you can use acrylic paint is to use some wax paper and protect your surface with wax paper, or use your wax paper as a palette. In your kit, you might have received plastic palette here with wells, individual wells in which you can put lots of color. They're inexpensive, relatively easy to clean, and they can be covered with, well, if you're still working and want to continue working, they can be covered with a saran wrap or a plastic wrap and stay dry in case you need to leave. So these work really well. If you're using acrylic paint, another thing you can do with acrylic paint, if you come and go frequently, that is, you get interrupted, don't have a long painting session, you can add some liquid acrylic retarding called slow dry medium. You can add it right to your paint, or you can add a little bit to a spray bottle. In this spray bottle, you can see that one side has sort of a cloudy mixture. That's because there's acrylic retardant in there. And you can liberally spray your palette over the top. Not too much, you don't want to soak it, but you can spray that liquid on the surface and keep things dry. These are really simple and easy to use. It's not easy to blend the colors in them. So something like a sheet of wax paper works really well for a palette. That paper, that waxed paper, also comes in a gummed sheet or tablet. And you can tear these pieces out. These are a little heavier than wax paper. And you can put your paints on this surface and paint with them. Array your different hues, your 3 primaries, or the primaries that you make from our 7 kinds of paint. Palettes get various kinds of uses. This is a gouache palette that I keep around for when I use a gouache, which is an opaque watercolor paint. And I'm able to write the numbers of the paints on there so I know exactly what I'm dipping into. And when I make primary and secondary colors using gouache. These kinds of palettes are basically made for and by watercolorists. Watercolor it can be put back into solution when dried. So you can add water to watercolor, and even though it dries up, you can go back and use it. And you can do a lot of mixing in complicated, a little bit more complicated palettes like this one. My own personal set of watercolors that I use and my favorite hues are in this particular set, which seals shut. And I keep the paints listed by paint number in a particular order. I start with yellows, move through oranges that I use, and on the outside I've labeled those paints inside, so I know exactly what I'm painting with when I'm reaching for a blue. The top of the palette seals, and I can also use the top of the palette for mixing. But acrylic paint is a little bit more tricky. It dries rather quickly, and without adding a retardant, you may find it dries too fast for you. So consider some of these options. You can also cover one sheet of wax paper with another sheet, and hopefully those will stay dry for when you're not working with them. And then a final word about palettes. Traditional palettes were shaped for oil painters, and oil painters could array their set of hues on the surface, and then using a long-handled brush, dip into, let's see if I have a long-handled brush here. I don't. I have a long-handled stick. But you could dip into the various paints, and because they were oil-based, they did not dry quickly. A set of colors on a palette like this is often referred to as a palette. That is, this particular combination of hues that a painter uses can be termed a palette, as well as the physical item that the paint is spread out on. So there's more than one way of thinking about a palette. It is both a collection of colors, and it is a device or a medium or a board on which you can array the paints you use while you're working. So the next most important thing you can do is prepare your space. Make sure you're prepared to work and you can go through in one sitting. Don't plan on being interrupted. Set yourself your space easily, and make sure that you have ample amounts of water and water jars. I have one that dirty jar for when I'm rinsing my brushes, and one clean jar where I test my brushes for cleanliness. I have brush holders. I have brush soap in case I can't get a pigment out. And I have a supply of brushes ready to go here. I've got a pencil, an eraser in case I need to do some last minute work, and I have a palette knife. But most of the work you're doing can be done with brushes. You have 3 brushes in your kit, a small one that's round, the ferrule is round on that brush, a medium-sized to large one, and then you have a 1/2-inch flat brush. Flat brush is really great for painting little areas of color like our color wheels demand, little flat, even areas of color. So make sure that that's off to the side, and you can reach it easily with your dominant hand. Make sure you've got an extra supply of water, some retardant medium if you need to, something to spray your palette, and make sure that you have all the right colors that you need. Hansa yellow medium for the yellow, a phthalo green, blue shade, and a phthalo blue green shade. You have naphthol red light and quinacridone magenta. The quinacridone magenta has a bluish tone, and it will be paired up with a phthalo blue green shade to make violets. The naphthol red light may be mixed with quinacridone magenta to make a true red, somewhere between those 2 colors. Or you may find that this is very close to a true red by itself. But Mixed with Hansa yellow, these make beautiful oranges. Mixed with quinacridone magenta, Hansa yellow does not make beautiful oranges and yellows. So we're using 2 paints to make the primary red, 2 paints to make the primary blue, but we will be shifting phthalo blue and quinacridone magenta down here to make our violets, blue violets. Hansa Yellow Medium is our workhorse. It's a single paint that will be mixed with phthalo green blue shade and mixed with naphthol red light to make the rest of the compositions. So make sure your paints are available to you. You know where they are. Put them out here so you're ready. Envision your color wheel in your mind and plan, as I have done, to start with the lightest value paints first. This is a watercolorist's secret. Things get muddier and muddier as you move along with watercolor. So you always do the lightest and the cleanest colors first. That holds true with acrylics too. Acrylics are water-based, a polymer emulsion. When the water evaporates, the emulsion solidifies and seals in the pigments. And you get some beautiful pigments, but they cannot be moved around afterwards. They can be painted over, but not moved around. So I'm going to probably do a, my next video will be watching me paint to get optimum colors. And what I like to do when I paint is I test out my color adjacent to the area. I do a lot of testing, making sure that I have the optimum amount of water. I'll be squeezing that Hansa yellow paint on this piece of waxed paper. And I'll be mixing it here with other colors. I'll be squeezing a little yellow here and a little yellow there so that I can make a yellow green and a green. And I will be moving those. I will have this palette off to my left side. And I'll move my paints over there now. But where I'm going to be doing my testing is in the outside of this piece of paper here. This is the Bristol board, and this is the color wheel that I laid out the other day. I want to know where I'm going, and I know that I'll be painting in these larger curved areas here, but that I also have to reserve some paint from making a yellow-green, for instance, to mix it with its complement, red-violet. This is why having a retarder in your paint keeps you from having to remix colors all the time. Granted, a color wheel takes a lot of color mixing, and if you don't have a separate brush for each paint that you're using, you will have to go through the laborious process of cleaning your brushes frequently, especially when using the lighter value colors. And those would be Hansa Yellow and Red Naphthol. They're going to take a little bit more assiduous brush cleaning before you get going. So you may not find the need for a palette knife, but it's usually very useful when using a heavy body acrylic that comes out like toothpaste. It's essential for mixing on the palette. You can mix on a palette like this, that is a sheet of wax paper, but you might just get by with mixing your colors with your brush. It is cleaner and more efficient to use a palette knife. So in place of a palette knife, you can use an old piece of plastic credit card or anything that you can sort of move around and mix the paint and then wipe off the palette knife when you were done. Then you don't have to clean your brushes so often. So that's my setup, introduction for this. Also make sure that you've got some paper towels, some moist paper towels. Your hands are going to get paint on them. You can get paint on your on the other areas that you have. And do take your color wheel. I always keep a value scale out when I'm working, so I get reminded of what that range of value is like. But you might also keep your color wheel out here and say, you know, that color wheel is good enough. I think if I can get those colors out of my 5 bottles of golden acrylic paint, I'm going to be all right. And but if you think you can improve on this commercial color wheel, I can agree with you. You probably can, because the quality of paints that you're using in this set is higher than the dyes that was printed on. So over a period of the next 24 hours, I will be painting this color wheel for you, but I wanted to make sure that you had the setup. And get yourself a nice clean place to work. Shut out the distractions, or turn on, put your headsets on and get ready to work. But be prepared. Make sure that you use, for small drops of moistening, if you have your pipettes, make sure those are available to you. And if you're having any difficulties, stop, reassess what you're doing, and see what you can do to affect the change. Because once you put color down, you don't want to have to put it down again too many times. All right, that's it for now.